When you think of football's greatest ever underdog triumphs, what immediately springs to mind? When Leicester City defied the absurd 5,000 to 1 odds to win the Premier League? What about Greece against all odds conquering the Euros in 2004? Or Denmark in '92, despite originally failing to qualify for the tournament? And don't forget about Zambia's historic AFCON victory in 2012, spurred on by a national tragedy. Now these are just a few examples. Throughout the last century and beyond, the beautiful game has delivered endless beautiful moments. However, my personal favorite footballing tale has to be the criminally underappreciated Lions of Mesopotamia. Now you may or may not have heard of these guys and what they accomplished together, but I can say this with absolute certainty, there's simply nothing quite like it. This team's resilience extended far beyond the pitch, transcending political instability, religious division, and war, an achievement that temporarily unified a completely broken country. This is the incredible story of Iraq's football miracle.
The team without hope has brought joy to its fractured nation. And football succeeds, perhaps you could say, where politics has failed. Iraq are champions of Asia.
The beginning of the 21st century was unimaginably brutal to the people of Iraq. Following the United States-led invasion of the country in 2003, Iraq became embroiled in a complex power struggle that not only completely destabilized the region, but also led to an increased sectarian divide between Iraq's predominantly Sunni and Shia Muslim populations. The one shining light throughout this utterly devastating period, however, was an emerging golden generation of Iraqi footballers. 3 years prior, we got a first glimpse of this developing group as they shocked the world to a 4th place finish at the 2004 Olympic Games. This included notable victories over Costa Rica, Australia, and a young Portugal side featuring a fresh-faced Cristiano Ronaldo. 2 years later, they had built on that success to finish 2nd at the 2006 Asian Games, but any optimism on the pitch was completely overshadowed by the off-field devastation. By 2007, the violence had peaked with the civilian casualty rate surpassing 100,000. Half the population were on ration cards at this point. Everyone in the war-torn country was collectively reeling from the trauma bestowed upon them. Employing a coach to lead their devastated country was no easy task. The first 3 coaches who were offered the job politely declined, and so João van Vieira, a Brazilian journeyman who had previously worked with 26 clubs and 5 national teams, took up the monumental challenge with just 2 months to prepare for the 2007 Asian Cup. But the task couldn't have been any more chaotic, as he recalled several of the players had lost relatives in the conflict. Only 6 players turned up to our first training session. To make things even more difficult, the team, which mirrored the situation within Iraq, lacked any sort of unity. The playing group comprised of Sunnis, Shias, and Kurds. The tension was palpable. So Vieira's sole focus in the build-up to the tournament wasn't on implementing any sort of coaching philosophy, but rather on restoring a sense of harmony within the dressing room. Thankfully, the players eventually made peace, agreeing to put religious and political beliefs aside out of respect for their country. But this didn't sit well within various militias throughout Iraq, with death threats made against players and their relatives as a result of banding together. These fears were amplified due to the frequency of military airstrikes conducted during their training sessions. There was absolutely no semblance of safety anywhere within Iraq. In fact, winger Hawamullah Muhammad often brought a machine gun to training in case violence of any sort broke out. It became such a hazardous environment that the entire team was forced to flee their own country just to avoid being killed. Many players lost loved ones as a result. Goalkeeper Noor Sabri's brother-in-law was killed, as was Hawamullah Muhammad's stepmother. Shortly after, midfielder Nashad Akram's relatives were kidnapped, then murdered, and just 2 days before the tournament commenced, the team's physio Anwar Alawi was killed in a car bomb back in Baghdad. The mental anguish at which this playing group was subjected to was just devastating. Morale couldn't have been any lower for their opening match against co-host Thailand in Bangkok. These were the 2 lowest ranked teams in the group, with tournament favourites Australia and fellow Middle Eastern nation Oman heavily favoured to reach the knockout stages. Iraq's tournament got off to the worst possible start, giving away a penalty inside the opening 5 minutes and conceding the first goal of the Asian Cup. But this match day would prove to be the start of something special. Iraq were causing all sorts of problems via the set piece that day and eventually hit back courtesy of their talismanic captain Yunus Mahmoud. A 1-1 draw was a respectable result considering the tumultuous circumstances heading into the match, but their next fixture was a proper David v Goliath scenario. Iraq faced Australia. This was during the peak of the Socceroos' golden generation, which possessed the likes of Mark Schwarzer, Harry Kewell, Tim Cahill, Mark Viduka, Lucas Neal, and many others. Truth be told, this wasn't expected to be a contest, but what followed was a footballing spectacle. Iraq shockingly hit the front, courtesy of a wicked Nasher Akram free kick that deceived everyone on its way to the net. Mark Viduka responded in the second half with a stunning header to temporarily level the scoreline. However, Iraq didn't back down that day as expected. Their maestro Akram then expertly found Hawamullah Muhammad, who made no mistake to restore Iraq's lead. It was astonishing to witness live. Australia were being battered by this unwavering Iraqi team, who officially put the game to bed late on in a deserved 3-1 victory. This was a historic result. There were jubilant scenes throughout the streets of Iraq that day. They were now in the driver's seat to qualify. All they needed was a point in their final match against Oman to secure their passage to the knockout stages. But they didn't do it the easy way. Iraq scraped through by the skin of their teeth that day in a hard-fought 0-0 draw against their Arab competitors, officially topping Group A and setting up a favourable quarter-final clash against fellow co-hosts Vietnam. Now, Iraq had a distinct advantage in this match as the game would be played in Bangkok, so no additional travel would be required for Vieira's men. They were confident of advancing, but there was also huge pressure starting to build. You see, Iraq had been knocked out in the quarterfinal stages of their last 3 Asian Cup campaigns. They'd never reached the semis prior to this tournament, but after everything they'd been through just to get here, defeat was not an option. Less than 90 seconds into their clash with Vietnam, and Iraq had taken the lead. A towering header from Yunus Mahmoud off the back of a brilliant delivery from Akram, a carbon copy of their opening goal of the tournament against Thailand. Whilst Iraq were physically and technically superior to their opponents, it would be a game defined by set pieces. In the 62nd minute, a free kick was awarded just outside the box, to which their prodigious number 10 Yunus Mahmoud stepped up and expertly dispatched. This was the nail in the coffin for Vietnam, and for Iraq, arguably their greatest ever footballing achievement, a semi-final appearance in the Asian Cup. They had no right to get this far, but were now determined to go all the way. However, another powerhouse nation would await them in the semis, 2-time Asian Cup winners South Korea. They faced off in a cagey affair in Kuala Lumpur. Neither side found the back of the net after 90 minutes. In extra time, Iraq were incredibly unlucky not to hit the front, but the game would eventually be settled via penalties. Now, South Korea had got the better of Iran in a shootout 3 days prior, so they were full of confidence in this scenario, but Iraq were determined to keep their composure. The first 6 spot kicks were all dispatched, 3 apiece. Who was going to crack first? Yom Ki-hyun was next to step up for South Korea, and his penalty was saved. Noor Sabri with a massive right hand. Ahmed Najeb was up next and gave the keeper no chance. South Korea's tournament was hanging in the balance. They had to score or Iraq would advance. But destiny was not on the Korean side that day. Kim Jong-woo's penalty hit the post to send Iraq to the Asian Cup final. A few weeks prior, it wasn't within the realms of possibility that this team could reach the final. Similar to their victory over Australia back in the group stages, fans flooded to the streets back home to celebrate the occasion. But this dreamlike scenario soon unraveled into a horrific nightmare, as news had emerged of 2 bombings taking place in Baghdad shortly after full time, killing more than 50 people and leaving around 150 injured. The players were completely shattered by this news. It was understood that some team members didn't want to play the final, considering the risk of further bloodshed for their people. But a grieving mother who had just lost her son would then appear on live television, begging the national team to keep playing and claim she wouldn't bury her son until they brought the trophy home. So despite the endless sea of tragedy that had been imposed on these players, they stood tall and decided to fight once more. On paper, it was another David v Goliath matchup, Iraq against Saudi Arabia. The Saudis had comfortably progressed to the final, topping their group before taking out Uzbekistan in the quarters and Japan in the semis. It was their 6th final in 23 years, and they were now gunning for a record 4th Asian Cup title. But Iraq were fearless of their opponents. They'd already defeated big teams previously. The only legitimate fear they had was further suffering for their people. But the fighting spirit of Iraq shone through that day, and they rallied for one last dance in front of 60,000 fans in Jakarta. As you'd expect in a high-stakes final, it was a tense affair. Both teams created chances, but few were clear-cut. Iraq looked the better side throughout, with the Saudis unable to match their physicality and composure in midfield, but it was going to take something special to break the deadlock. That moment would eventually arrive in the 72nd minute, courtesy of a set piece, with who else but Yunus Mahmoud arriving at the back post to give Iraq the 1-0 lead. Mahmoud's late header was to be the only goal that day, with the Lions of Mesopotamia prevailing. The fairy tale was now complete. In a country so devoid of good news and institutions to be proud of, these players reminded a nation on the brink of total collapse the importance of unity. And the scenes were just incredible. Iraq came together momentarily to celebrate this miraculous achievement, but it wasn't just limited to their nation's borders. People of Iraqi origins flocked to the streets of major cities across the world, a party of epic proportions. The English commentator of the final, Simon Hill, summarized the scope of their success in poetic fashion. The team without hope has brought joy to its fractured nation. Football succeeds where politics has failed. Thank you so much for those who stuck around to the end. I hope you're able to take something out of this remarkable chapter in football history, in amongst all the brutality and suffering that occurs on a daily basis throughout the world. I think sport, particularly football, can be an extraordinary tool in improving the plight of humanity. But don't take my word for it. Look no further than the great Nelson Mandela.
Sport has the power to change the world. It has the power to unite people in a way that little else does. It speaks to youth in a language they understand. Sport can create hope where once there was only despair. It is more powerful than governments in breaking down racial barriers. It laughs in the face of all types of discrimination.